For families, New Year's Eve is a time for relaxation, celebration, and gift-giving. For the young heroine of this story, it began the same way. She was only 18 years old, with her whole life ahead of her, and her dreams were beginning to come true. It seemed that nothing could overshadow such a beautiful moment, except for a gruesome crime. Nancy Mestre was born in 1975. Her hometown was Barranquilla, located in Colombia. This is a fairly large city with a population of over 1 million people. The girl lived in a family with her parents, Martin Mestre and Nancy Varga, along with her brother. From childhood, she was always sociable and cheerful. The children had an excellent relationship with their parents, forming bonds of attachment and respect. Nancy considered her mother her best teacher, and her father her best friend. Their family was quite well off, allowing her to receive a quality education. She studied at one of the country's best colleges, Marymount. Even before she mastered English perfectly, Nancy began dreaming of studying in the United States. She was fascinated by everything related to that country and dreamed of living there. On the eve of New Year's Eve in 1993, the entire family gathered for a festive evening. Initially, they planned to celebrate the holiday elsewhere, but unforeseen circumstances forced them to change their plans. Nancy's brother had recently suffered a serious injury during a soccer match and could not continue training for a while. Because of this, he was nearly immobile, and they decided to celebrate at home. There was another great reason for celebration. Nancy had been accepted into a university in the United States, and they were celebrating this milestone. Soon, she was set to leave for the US, and her dream had never been closer to coming true. Unfortunately, the joyful celebration was not destined to last. At approximately 1:44 in the morning, a businessman, Jaime Enrique Sanade Carmani, arrived at the family's home. He was 10 years older than Nancy, but that didn't stop him from asking her parents for permission to take her out on New Year's Eve. They had been communicating and dating for some time. Since Jamie came from a respected and decent family, her parents were favorable toward him. Nancy also wanted to celebrate New Year's with his family, but her parents set important conditions. She was to return home no later than 3 in the morning, and Jamie was to take care of her. He agreed to the conditions, and they went out to celebrate. When the agreed-upon time passed and the couple had not returned, her parents were not initially worried. They assumed the young couple had simply lost track of time. Wanting not to spoil their daughter's New Year's celebration with restrictions or arguments, they left the staircase light on for her and went to bed. Several hours later, the head of the family woke up and checked the hallway. Nancy had not returned, she was not at home, and her room was empty. This caused her father great concern. Initially, he went out searching for his daughter in all the popular clubs where she might have been that night. Nancy's mobile phone was not answering, but at that moment, there seemed to be no reason to call the police. Her father tried contacting her friends, but they too had no idea where she was. When he couldn't find her at any of the clubs, he decided to go to Jamie's home, where the young man who had taken her out was supposed to bring her back. He assumed that his daughter might be there. At the house, he found Jaime's mother cleaning blood off the floor. This sight was deeply alarming. When questioned, she explained that her son and Nancy had gone to the hospital and that the blood on the floor belonged to his daughter. She could not answer any further questions. She didn't even know exactly what had happened to Nancy or what condition she was in. The distraught father jumped into his car and rushed to the medical facility. This was happening around 6 o'clock in the morning. Upon arriving at the hospital, he encountered Nancy's boyfriend's father, who told him an incredible story. Allegedly, Nancy, while at their house that night, had attempted to take her own life by shooting herself in the head with a gun. Her father did not believe this story. To Nancy's parents, it made no sense. She had never given them any reason to doubt her mental health. The young student was cheerful, happy, and moreover, had just achieved her dream of being accepted to a university in the United States. She was eagerly anticipating the trip, and everything in her life was going well. There were no reasons for depression, let alone for taking her own life. It also seemed implausible that she would do such a thing on New Year's Eve, while at a friend's house. The thought simply did not fit in his mind. He spoke with the nurses who had admitted his daughter to the hospital, and they shared disturbing information. They said that Nancy had been brought to them completely naked, covered only with a simple sheet and barely showing signs of life. Her body and hair were covered in sand, dirt, and fragments of plants, as if she had been dragged through a forest. This account did not align at all with the story Jamie's father had just told him. Nancy was supposed to have spent the evening at their house, having dinner with them. Why was she naked, covered in dirt, with plants tangled in her hair? Something was clearly very wrong. The situation was harrowing, and Martin was filled with anguish, knowing that his daughter's life was hanging by a thread. He called home to inform his wife of what had happened. Upon learning this, the entire family rushed to the hospital. However, the doctor's prognosis was grim. The medical team found that Nancy had suffered severe injuries that caused significant complications. She fought for her life for 8 days, enduring multiple surgeries while in a coma. Doctors did everything they could to save her. However, it was not enough. When the medical staff informed the family that their loved one could not be saved, that she would not return to life, and asked for the necessary consent to disconnect her from life support machines, the family made the difficult decision to agree. On January 9th, 1994, they gave their consent. They entered her hospital room and began singing a childhood lullaby, saying goodbye to their beloved girl. Nancy passed away without regaining consciousness and without being able to tell her version of what happened to her on that ill-fated New Year's Eve at Jamie's house. None of Nancy's relatives believed her boyfriend's version of events, and they went to the police, demanding a thorough investigation of the circumstances. They also asked the authorities to carefully examine Jamie's family, who were clearly hiding something. Law enforcement officials heeded the family's request and began an investigation. Forensic examinations were conducted, and traces of gunpowder on Jamie's hands indicated that he had fired a gun. The shot had been made to the right temple, but no gunpowder residue was found on Nancy's right hand, as would be expected if she had taken her own life in such a manner. Instead, residue was found on her left hand. It was clear to everyone that it was impossible for her to have shot herself in the right temple in this way. It seemed the perpetrator had attempted to stage her death as a suicide, but the staging was poorly executed. During the autopsy, it was discovered that Nancy had engaged in sexual activity with 2 men on the night of the shooting. 2 distinct samples of male bodily fluids were found on her body. Numerous abrasions, bruises, and other injuries on her body indicated that she had resisted fiercely, meaning she had been a victim of rape, which the perpetrators had tried to cover up. Additionally, under her broken fingernails, likely from the struggle, forensic experts found traces of skin. This evidence was characteristic of active self-defense during an attack and could help identify the killer. The skin particles found under her nails were collected and sent to a laboratory for analysis. Jamie's gun was discovered in his home, wrapped in blood-stained shorts and hidden under his bed. Ballistic testing confirmed that it was the murder weapon. By this point, there was no doubt that this was a crime, and the case was reclassified as a homicide investigation. Jaime and his family became the main suspects, as the incident had occurred in their home, and gunpowder residue was found on Jamie's hand. There was ample reason to believe that Jamie had raped and killed Nancy, and that his family had covered for him and helped destroy evidence. Therefore, they too should face charges, and it was necessary to identify anyone else who had been involved that night. Investigators awaited the results of forensic analyses and continued gathering evidence to press charges against them. News of the incident quickly spread throughout Colombia, causing public outrage. Several demonstrations were held in support of the murdered girl's family. People demanded that those responsible for the rape and brutal murder of the young woman, whose life had been so cruelly cut short, be found and punished. While the investigation was ongoing, a few days after the tragic events, Martin, Nancy's father, received an anonymous letter. The letter described a possible motive for his daughter's murder. The anonymous writer claimed that Nancy had caught her boyfriend engaging in perverse sexual activities. Fearing exposure, the perpetrators allegedly caught, raped, and then shot her. Afterward, they took her to the hospital, but not immediately, as traces of dirt and plants on her body indicated she had been taken to a forest, presumably to be discarded. However, when they realized she was still showing signs of life, they decided to take her to the hospital. The identity of the anonymous informant was never uncovered. During the investigation, Jaime disappeared. It appeared he had learned of his impending arrest and indictment and chose to evade responsibility for his crimes. Detectives tried to locate him or establish contact, but their efforts were unsuccessful. His family claimed they did not know his whereabouts and were unable to reach him, though this seemed implausible. It was evident that Jaime was guilty and hiding to avoid capture, but locating him proved impossible. Meanwhile, a warrant was issued for his arrest, and charges of sexual assault and premeditated murder were filed against him in absentia. Since he could not be found, the trial proceeded without him. During the trial, all evidence against Jaime was presented. Gunpowder traces on his hands, his DNA on the victim's body after the assault, and skin particles under her nails were indisputable proof of his guilt. He could not refute this evidence because he was absent from the courtroom. Initially, the prosecution had a key witness, a neighbor of Jamie's family. The woman claimed that on the night in question, she witnessed horrifying events in the accused's apartment. She heard multiple men shouting and a girl screaming for help, begging to call her father, followed by the sound of a gunshot. However, when it was her turn to testify in court, the elderly woman stated that she had heard nothing that night. It was apparent she had been intimidated into withdrawing her statement. Despite this setback, the Colombian court found Jaime guilty on all counts. On July 5, 1996, he was sentenced in absentia to 27 years in prison for the sexual assault and premeditated murder of 18-year-old Nancy. The prosecution believed that Jaime had fled to the United States and vanished there. In April 1998, the man responsible for Nancy's death was added to international criminal databases at the request of the Colombian police.